Right, welcome to our sixth video on functions. This is part of the GCSE or IGCSE video series in which I do all the lessons plus revisions plus exam questions on GCSE maths and IGCSE maths topic. We've been looking at functions and this is our sixth lesson. Today what we want to focus on is basically called the inverse of a function. So the inverse function is the main thing. Now, to the inverse basically means reverse, is the opposite. And what an inverse function does, it just reverses the effect of a function. Now, the inverse of a function f of x, for example, is written with minus 1 at the top there. So this minus 1 at the top basically means the inverse, it means the opposite of it. Okay. Now, with inverse functions, what basically idea happens is that the x becomes y and the y becomes x. Now, what that means is that what you start with is what you end up with. So what you start with in a function is what you end up with in an inverse function. Now, let's look at a simple example. Before we look at example 1 there, let's just look at a simple example. Now, say for example, I have y equals to x add 2. Yeah. So y equals to x add 2. Think about what x is going to be equal to in terms of y and 2. Now, doing the opposite, you're going to see that x equals to y take away 2. So this y here, if y is f of x, then this x here, this function now here, becomes the inverse now. So it's going to be f minus 1 bracket x. Okay, so that's going to be the inverse of that function there. So when it comes to the inverse, you're just basically doing the opposite. And in simple, you're just making x the subject. That's what you're doing. Okay. Now, let's look at example 1 now properly. It says find the inverse of the function g of x equals to 7x plus 1 all over 2. Now, the inverse basically means, as I said, what you start with is what you end up with. And y becomes x here. In other words, the domain becomes the range. The input becomes the output. Now, so let's look at g of x here. Now, g of x is given by the function 7x plus 1 all divided by 2. And I want you to think about it this way, that you are doing 7 times x plus 1 divided by 2, and that is giving you what g of x is. So looking at this function, you can see this way, that 7x add 1 divided by 2, it gives you g of x. Let's call g of x y. So what we're saying is that if you think of a number and you're calling it x, then you are timesing it by 7. So you times it by 7. Then you are adding 1 to it. So you add 1 then after that. Then you divide your answer by 2. The answer becomes y. So simply put, think of a number, times it by 7, then add 1 to it, and then the answer you get, if you want, you can put bracket there. The answer you get there, you divide by 2, the answer is going to be y. Now, what about if I wanted to find what that x is? Then I could start with y, isn't it? I do the opposite, start with y, then I times y by 2, don't I? Yeah, times y by 2, so it's going to be 2y. Then after doing that, what do I do then? Then I take away 1. Then I divide by 7. Then that gives me what x is. Okay, so just using inverse operation to do that. But let's look at a more advanced method of doing that. Like I said earlier, all you need to do is to make x a subject, and that becomes the inverse function. Okay, so step number 1, the gx, call it y, like we've done here now. And then the next thing, just make x a subject. So if I make x a subject here, I'm going to do the inverse operation. I'm going to times this side by 2, isn't it? Because this is divided by 2, so it times by 2. So I'm going to end up with 2y. Okay. Now this 2y, you can then do the opposite, take away 1 from it. So I've got 7x equals to 2y minus 1. Okay, so doing the opposite. Then the last thing I need to do is divide basically by 7. So I've got 2y minus 1 all divided by 7. So this now becomes the inverse function. Now, what then you do here, this inverse function, the notation for it is normally g minus 1 x. So this part here. Then you're going to copy this one, but as you copy this, the y is never an input. So you're going to need to change this to x. So that's going to be 2x minus 1 all divided by 7. Okay. So again, let's go through this. The first thing, let gx be called y. After that, all you need to do is to make x a subject. After making x a subject, then this x here is as if it becomes y again. Okay, like I said earlier, the input becomes the output becomes the input. So this x becomes y, and this y becomes x. But you don't call this one y. You call it the inverse of this here, which is going to be g, the g minus 1 of x. Then this value here, y, the y has to be changed to become x, and this becomes the inverse function. It does the opposite for you. Okay, so that's how to find the inverse function. You just basically make x a subject. Okay, now I'd like you to pause this video very quickly, and then all you need to do, make f of x be y, then make x a subject. Then once you've done that, let y becomes x. Okay, so pause the video and then have a go at this one quickly. Okay, well done. So I hope you've tried them. Right, so I'm just going to do a question. I'm going to pick a hard question, say for example, question F. I'm going to do question F for you. Right, so the function itself says g of x, so I've got g of x there equals to x over 8, and we add in 1. The first thing I said earlier, let g of x be y. So we call that one y equals to x over 8 plus 1. Then the next thing, make x a subject. Okay, so make x a subject, which means I need to take away 1 away from y. So it's going to be y, take away 1. That's going to give us x divided by 8. The next thing now, remember I'm making x a subject, so I need to times this side by 8. I need to do the opposite by 8. So I'm going to have 8 times by y minus 1 equals to x, like that. Okay, and then you can open the brackets and you can actually swap them around. So 8y minus 8 equals to x. Now, x being the subject, it's a good idea to bring it on the left-hand side. So we're going to be 8y minus 8. Now, at this stage now, this x becomes the inverse function. So I've got g minus 1 of x. And this y here becomes x. 8x minus 8. So this is the inverse function. It's the opposite of this function here. So with this function, notice that we are dividing by 8. But with this one, we are timesing by 8 here. Okay. Right, so that's that. I would then also then do, if I just pick probably D, let's do D for you. So remember, it's just making x the subject. That's the idea. You make x the subject. You make x the subject. So let's try go over D together. Let's go over D together. He says g of x equals to bracket 2x plus 7 squared. So we're doing D. So he says g of x equals to 2x plus 7 squared. Okay, that's a function. We want to find the inverse of that. So again, g of x becomes y. So I've got y equals 2x plus 7 all squared. Now, you don't need to open this bracket here. It's unnecessary. All you need to do is to make x a subject. And the way you can do that is to do the opposite with this square first, which is square rooting both sides. So I'm going to square root y equals to 2x plus 7 squared, but then you're square rooting it. Okay, you have to do the same. Now, when you're square rooting a square, that basically means it cancels off. So the root and the square will just basically cancel off. So I'm going to have square root of y equals to 2x plus 7. And then making x the subject, I've got root y. You take away 7 there equals to 2x. Then divide both sides by 2. So I've got root y, take away 7, all divided by 2. and that's what x basically is. Then all I need to do now is to make call x, the inverse is going to be g minus 1 bracket x equals to this. But you see now the y becomes x, like we agreed earlier. Okay, and then I've got minus 7 there, all divided by 2. So that is the inverse of that function. Okay. Now remember, with inverse functions, the input becomes the output. The output becomes the input. So this y here becomes x. Okay. Now when you get to year 12, you're going to be doing graphs on this, and you're going to understand more about inverse functions. So hopefully that was helpful. Now I'm just going to put the mark scheme down, so then you can quickly mark the equations that you just done. So I'm just going to put that down, so then you can quickly mark the equations that you just basically done. So pause the video again and have a go at marking your mark, please. Now my aim is that you get your A star or grade 9 or 8 in your GCSE, and get your A or A star in your IGCSE maths. I'm going to be doing more and more videos, And if you click the button, that's just on this video, all you need to do is to click it, and then to take you to all my GCSE maths and IGCSE maths videos. So I'm basically giving you all you need to get your grade 9 or 8, or to get your A or A star in your GCSE maths and IGCSE maths. Thank you so much for today. But actually, just another thing that has just come to my mind. I've got one more question, which is, for example, example 2 here. It says, find the inverse of the function f of x equals to root 4x minus 1, all divided by 3. I would like you to pause the video and try and find the inverse of this one. Pause the video and try and find the inverse of this quickly. Okay, so let's go over it. So we'll say that f of x, call it y, so I've got y equals to 4x minus 1, all divided by 3. Yeah, so times both sides by 3 becomes 3y equals to root 4x minus 1. Then I want to make x a subject, so you need to remove this square thing. So what you're going to do now is to square. Yeah, if I go to square root, you square that, but you have to square both sides. So 3y times by 3y is going to be 9y squared. And this is going to be 4x minus 1. Because the square, what it does, it just basically cancels off the root. Okay. The next thing is just to make, just making x a subject. I've got 4x there. And really, I should have added 1 on this side. So if I just add 1 to this side, you do the opposite. I just have 9y squared. So 9y squared, and you add 1 there. Then the next thing now is to divide both sides by 4. So if I just put 4 here, and then I put 4 there, then you can see that this 4 cancels with that to give us x. And then I can swap them. I've got 9y squared plus 1, all divided by 4. Then the next thing, the x becomes the inverse function. And then the y becomes the x. So 9x squared plus 1, all divided by 4 for you. So that's the inverse of this. Okay. Right, so just a couple of questions very quickly. So if you want to try question 4 all the way to question 8, so pause the video, try question 4 all the way to question 8. Okay. Right, so I hope you've tried them. So I'm just going to pick 2 questions for you, and I'm going to go over them. So if I just pick question 60 as the first one. So we got h of x. So it's going to be h of x equals to 1 minus 2x squaring that, all divided by 5. Okay. Now remember that h of x is y now for us. Make it y, so it's 2x all divided by 5. And you're just basically squaring the top one here. So what you need to do first of all is to times this side by 5. So that's going to be 5y. So I've got 5y there. On that side I've got 1 minus 2x close bracket, and you're squaring it. Okay. The next thing is now to open the bracket. So I'm just going to square root both sides. So if I square both sides, I'm going to have root 5y there. And then this side, if I square root this side, what's going to happen is that this 2 is going to disappear. So I'm going to have 1 minus 2x. And then making x the subject, I've got root 5y. I'm going to have root 5y there. I've got root 5y inside. And then the 1 must come this side. So I've got -1. So you're going to put it minus there. And then I've got not 2x this time around, I've got -2x. Okay, I've got -2x. Now, I just want to wrap this part here so that I have got space to do the rest. I'm just going to take this part off. So then I can show you how to handle this -2x here. Okay. Right, so remember we're trying to make x the subject. It would be a good idea to swap them. So then you have -2x here. So you have -2x there. And then you have root 5y on this side and -1 there. Okay, the next thing now you want to do is to divide both sides by -2. So I've got x equals to root 5y minus 1 all divided by -2. Okay. Now at this stage, I would say if you're scared of dividing by negatives and simplifying, you can leave your answer like that. So then you don't make a mistake trying to simplify it if you're not sure. So in exam, if I were you, I could just leave root 5y minus 1 all divided by -2 if you don't want to mess around with this negative here. So now therefore x becomes the inverse. So it was h of x, it becomes h minus 1x. That becomes root 5y. Now we agree that y becomes x, and I've got 1 over -2. Okay. Now what you can do if you want to remove this -2 is to do this. You can times the top. If you times the top by -1 and you times the bottom by -1, you know, fraction with the fraction is a fraction. As long as you do the same thing to the top and to the bottom, the value of the entire fraction doesn't change. So I'm trying to times by -1 because I want to remove this negative. It's a bad thing to divide by a negative number. So if you do that, you do -1 times by this, it's going to be negative now, but this is going to be positive. This one's going to be positive here. So what have I got now? I've got negative times negative becomes positive, so it's a good thing to bring one forward. And then I've got negative times this becomes a negative, so that becomes minus 5x. And all we are doing at the moment, we're dividing by 2 now, because -1 times -2 becomes 2. So then I've got h bracket 1 over x. Right, so far we've been ignoring something, we've been assuming something, that the square root of a number is basically positive, but that's not correct. The square root of a number can be positive or negative. So when I'm square rooting both sides, I've just been ignoring the negative roots. For example, if I have where's that question? Okay, so if I have, say for example, y equals to x squared, then I want to square root both. I want to square root both sides. So I'm gonna square root both sides. I'm gonna say, let me bring the x this side. So I've got x squared equals to y. Now if I square root both sides, then I'm gonna have x equals to the square root of y. Now ideally, we should be saying x equals to a positive square root of y or a negative square root of y. So there should be two answers to this. But for convenience, for your GCSE or IGCSE, we've just been using positive, and at this stage, that is just okay for this. Okay? So hope that made sense to you. So that's it for this section. I'm just going to display the answers, so then you can basically mark your work. It's all about making x a subject and doing the inverse. That's all it's about, making x a subject by just doing the inverse. If you're squaring, you square root. If you're square rooting it, you square. That's all it is. Now remember that square roots normally have plus or minus, but at this stage you can ignore the minus, because if you're not ignoring the minus, you're going to have to do the same question twice, because you're going to have two answers for it. So at this stage, just ignore the negative. And there's also another meaning to that, which you're going to learn in your A level, something called functions and mappings. Yeah, you're going to learn that later. Okay, now I want you to try question 9 and question 10, please. Pause the video, try question 9 and question 10. Okay, right, so well done for that. I'm going to pick question 9 to go through because I know you really want me to go through question 9. As for question 10 is the same thing. You just make X a subject for that. So let's go through question 9. Okay. Now, so the inverse function g of x is equals 1 minus 2x all over 3x plus 5 can be found by rearranging the equation x equals to that and that. Okay. Now, they want us to show that if x is this, then 3x y plus 2y equals that. Now, what you need to do now is just basically rearrange this. Times out, rearrange it, so then it looks like this. Okay. So that's what we want to do now. Right, so what we are saying is that sorry about that. I normally have touch screen, so sometimes it messes me up. Sorry about that. Okay. Right, so we want to say that x 1 minus 2y equals 3y plus 5. That's the starting point. Now, all I want to do now is to do the opposite. So basically, I'm just going to times this side. I'm going to times x by that. So I'm going to have x okay, I'm just going to have x bracket 3y plus 5 equals to 1 minus 2y. So I'm timesing this side. You do the opposite. So 3y plus 5, you times it across. Okay. Now, or you could even put this over 1 if you want. So there's a fraction. So if you times this side and you times that way, then they're equal. So 1 times 1 minus 2y, it's just basically that. And then you just basically open the brackets. I've got 3xy plus 5x equals to 1 minus 2y. So that's where I am so far. But now I need to be guided. I need to be guided by this. On the right-hand side, I can see there's 1 minus 5x. But as for me, I've got 1 minus 2y. So what's going to happen is that I'm going to bring the minus 2y this side, and I bring the 5x that side. So then I've got 3xy. Now the minus 2y becomes plus 2y. Okay? And then the 1 becomes 1 minus 5x equals to 1 minus 5x. Okay? So that's question A done. Part A is done for you. Now the other part they're saying is that by factorizing the expression 3xy plus 2y, and hence find the inverse of the function. Now this function is this one here. Okay, so this function is basically this one here, which is still that. So gx equals to 1 minus 2x all over 3x plus 5. So that's what I want to do now. So factorize that expression first. So I'll take this one out. So taking this one out, then we factorize that. Okay. But the first thing I want us to do is to, first of all, just basically try and find the inverse function, this one here. If you can just put it separate and just try to find the inverse of it first. Let's see what we get. That might help us with understanding that part of the equation. So I'm going to start. So I've got g of x. Now g of x is y, we agreed earlier. So it's 1 minus 2x all divided by 3x plus 5. Okay. Then I'm going to have y times by. I'm just going to start again. Sometimes my computer really annoys me. Okay, so I'm just going to start again. So I've got y equals to 1 minus 2x all divided by 3x plus 5. And what I want to do now is to make x a subject. So times both sides, times this side by 3x plus 5. I'm going to have 3xy. So you times that by that, and then times that by that, plus 5y. Okay, now that's going to be equals to 1 minus 2x. Now remember, it's about making x a subject. So to do that, bring the x's on one side. So I've got 3xy, and this minus 2x, bringing this side, it's going to be 2x plus 2x. On this side, I'm going to have 1 minus 5y. It's about bringing the x on one side. Now, if you want to make x a subject, in a case like this, you normally have to factorize. I've got x term there and x term there. Factorize that. So you're going to have x times 3y is 3xy, factorizing. And then x times 2 is going to be basically 1 minus 5y. Okay. Then the next thing now is to basically just making x a subject. So I'm going to have x equals to 1 minus 5y. You're going to need to divide both sides by this here because I've got x times by 3y plus 2. So you divide this side by that. So you're going to have divided by 3y plus 2. Okay, so that is our inverse function. That is our inverse function. Okay, so what we now need to do is basically call it what? G of g minus 1 of x. That's what x become. And we agreed earlier that anywhere where y is now becomes x. Anywhere where y is becomes x. I've got 3x there plus 2. Okay, so I want us to understand this. So it says by factorizing the expression 3xy plus 2y, and hence find the inverse of g of x. Now, I didn't even have to approach this from here, but I could just basically approach it from that step there, which is what I did, and that made it even much more easy. So technically, I've answered question A and question B. How did I do that? Gx became y. Gx became y. Then all I did was to basically make x a subject, getting the inverse, which I did all the way here. When I got to this level, x becomes the inverse function, and y becomes x there. And I've got the inverse function they needed. So the inverse of g of x is 1 take over 5 of x, 5x all over 3x plus 2. Okay. So hope that was all right for you. So question 10, question 10a, b, c, the same thing. F of x becomes y, g of x becomes y, f of x becomes y. Make x a subject, and then just replace y with x, and that's that. Okay. Right, so I'm just going to show you the answers very quickly. If you now want to mark your work quickly, so just mark your work with the answers that are provided here, please. Okay. So pause the video and then mark your work. Okay, well done. Hope you done well on that. That's the end of our video actually. It was a bit long today because of some of the demanding questions. These are some of the GCSE and IGCSE videos that I do. And my aim and my intention is to make you get your A star or A in your GCSE maths, or get your A star or A or grade 9 or 8 in your GCSE maths. For all other videos that I do, just click the button that you find in this screen here. Thank you very much.